Most people consider the term brainwashing as only being associated with cults, where some sort of hypnotic, magical, persuasive, manipulative attempts are made to coerce vulnerable people to believe some story, in order to bring them into their flock, so to speak, to guide them in a particular predetermined direction. But what the majority of humanity don't know is that we've all been brainwashed. We've all been told certain variations of truth mixed with blatant lies, deceived in order to follow a certain agenda that basically ensured we remain enslaved, that we assume we have freedom, that profiteering continues, and that we voluntarily hand over our free will. I was born into a cult, so I assumed all I was told must be true. I had no other reference point, nothing to compare, because that's all I knew. And I'm sure all of you watching my videos on narcissism can now understand how brainwashing occurs gradually in all relationships with narcissists and intentionally controlling people, organizations, and systems. So if we take this globally, we've all been brainwashed to one extent or another. We've been kept in the dark, and that's why the term waking up. So what is brainwashing? It's also known as mind control, coercive persuasion, thought control and thought reform, and re-education. It's a concept that the human mind can be altered or controlled by certain psychological techniques. And brainwashing is a process. It happens gradually to the point where a person's identity is systematically broken down. But I'm not going to get into the details of how that's done. I just want to bring to light 3 areas we've all been brainwashed in, and how we woke up and started to connect the dots. We are vulnerable and more easily succumb to brainwashing, manipulation, and coercion when we are constantly bombarded with propaganda, experts, gurus, specialists who have strategically been placed in areas of authority. When everything we read, watch, hear, and see influences our perception and beliefs. We don't know that we've been brainwashed to believe only fearful things. And why? Because when we are afraid, we're more easily controlled. The first one is when you know that schooling is not synonymous with education. And the way you woke up is probably because you struggled at school. You didn't or you couldn't fit in. Perhaps you didn't learn the way they taught you, and you were falsely labelled as not being intelligent because you couldn't memorize or regurgitate repeatedly and on demand all that you were taught. You may have suffered greatly from low self-worth because you believed the lies and assumed that to be educated meant that you had to do really well at school and then that would guarantee your success. As time went on, you started to realize that all these gazillionaires had no formal education. They barely finished high school, but yet they achieved great worldly success. And this caused a lot of cognitive dissonance to all those people enslaved by astronomical student loans who never got a job in their field because there was only 2 availabilities despite 22,000 graduates. You painfully realized that by following the education system, you failed, not succeeded like they promised. And this is yet another false belief because we never fail if we learnt something. So many of us were brainwashed by this illusion of what it means to be educated. We had to make heartbreaking compromises and sacrifices to remain in this broken system. And sadly, we realized that the education system does not encourage creativity or spontaneity, being entrepreneurial, which are crucial and missing aspects of our authenticity. The mainstream education system is responsible for a lot of brainwashing, and it's amazing to see how many people realise this now. Education was just indoctrination. And don't misinterpret my words here. Of course, textbook education has its place, but knowledge was withheld just for those in academia until a lot of wise people started sharing their wisdom and YouTube became the great equalizer. Many people were brainwashed to completely trust, not question, and feel intimidated by those who were deemed highly educated, who often abused their positions and put themselves up on godlike pedestals. But let's remember that an impressively decorated wall of certificates does not equate respect or wisdom, and it definitely cannot replace integrity. The second area that many of us were brainwashed in, and what was really painful to awaken from, is understanding the difference between being a patient and a customer. This probably occurred if you got stuck in the medical system because you were ill for a really long time. You got passed around health professionals who had very little idea about health and who struggled to figure out the cause of your illness. You spent tens of thousands of dollars on experts who specialized in nothing more than prescribing more new drugs that alleviated the side effects of your previous drugs. You received no education or instruction about how to help yourself, how to promote your body's own healing ability, because that would possibly mean you stopped being a customer. You realized that a truly effective healer is one who has less patience, who's not threatened by your questions, who's not arrogant to assume they're blessed with dispensing some sort of secret knowledge from their godlike status position, but one who connects with you on a heart level, who empathizes for you, who is humble and compassionate, and who supports you on your endeavor to heal yourself. If you're not familiar with how your own body functions, you will be afraid of its communications and sensations. So you will be more easily influenced by a systems expert who, in your vulnerable state, can profiteer from your ignorance. There's no shortage of pharmaceutical companies that thrive on you depending on them to tell you what's possible. When people start waking up to this sort of brainwashing and start taking health matters into their own hands, they often get significant results much faster. If everybody invested in their health education, learnt about how to support their body's healing ability, about the power of certain plants, about cheap and effective healing modalities, the mainstream system would become obsolete. The system relies on your ignorance, dependency, and confusion. So use your discernment and know when you really are a patient and when you're venturing into becoming a customer. And the third area that we are commonly brainwashed in and painfully awakened to is when we finally understand that there is a difference between religion and spirituality. This realization probably occurred to you because you were raised by a narcissist who used dogma and religion to control you. You were indoctrinated that there was a middleman to reach God, and this one religion had the answer, which apparently your narcissist was so loyally devoted to, and demanded you obey or be judged and will burn in hell if you disobey. Perhaps the narcissist also conveniently distorted other spiritual practices in order to decorate their ego and spiritual superiority. And if that was the case, you may have completely written off spirituality, not knowing that this was a grand manipulation of your free will. So you think you willingly choose to disconnect from the divine, but really you were harmed and spiritually abused to such a point that you threw out the baby with the bathwater. And now you reactively have an intolerance of anything spiritual. Thus, you're left to wander in only the physical and mental planes, completely disassociated from the spiritual, fragmented, empty, existing in a subtle and defensive existential crisis. Let's remember the holistic perspective and that we are mind, body, and spirit. And when we're disconnected from our spirituality, we may not know it, but recognize it as a feeling as if being lost at sea, having no meaning, and we become more likely to self-destruct. What many don't realize is that when we are going through a situational crisis or we have been traumatized, we become particularly vulnerable to being recruited into cults and organized religions. In our tender times of vulnerability, that is when we are most likely to be exploited emotionally and spiritually by predators. And let's be realistic here. We are all vulnerable to being brainwashed. But the best way to develop our immunity is to always ask questions, to trust our gut, to follow the guidance of our heart, and to do our own research. And I want to leave you with this. Systems and relationships based on profiteering or taking advantage of someone's ignorance or vulnerability will always intentionally seek to manipulate and brainwash because they want to alter your perception so you buy their version of reality. And we can feel victimized because we have been, but we can also take a more empowered position now and consider, what do these situations ask of us? To educate ourselves, to assertively know what our truth is, what's right and wrong for us. These situations are inviting us to trust ourselves, rely on our inner knowing, despite the outer chaos or resistance. And of course, this is a challenge. And most of all, what the lesson for us as individuals is to master discernment. Use our wisdom, which is a combination of both our mind and our heart, so we can decide for ourselves, no longer be so easily influenced, emotionally manipulated, or bullied. In this information age, with all the resources that we have at our disposal, to remain willfully ignorant is a choice. The age of spoon feeding is over. And it's time that we each make some very difficult decisions and start taking charge of our own health and our own life. There is no point complaining about these broken systems or investing any more energy in blaming and hating those who have brainwashed us or expecting someone else to fix them. No one is going to give us the answers on a silver platter. It's up to us to disengage from these systems, develop the courage to stand in our truth, learn from what wasn't working, and create new systems, because we are the change that we've been waiting for.